I'll just introduce our very first speaker, who is Aziza Chaouni. Yeah, that's Aziza. So Aziza Chaouni is the founding principal of Aziza Chaouni Project, ACP. She was born and raised in Fez, Morocco. She's trained both as a structural engineer and as an architect, with 14 years working experience in Morocco, France, and United States of America. Aziza graduated cum laude from Columbia University and with distinction from Harvard Graduate School of Design. Prior to creating ACP, which is Aziza Chaouni Project, Aziza co-founded and ran Bureau East with partner Tekauku Tajiba. Her work with the previous office, Bureau East, and with ACP has won several top design awards and recognitions, including the Holcim Gold Award for Sustainable Construction 2009, and has been published and widely exhibited. Aziza is also an associate professor at the Daniel School of Architecture, Landscape and Design, where she leads the Designing Ecological Tourism Lab. She is a member of the Scientific Committee of ICOMOS, ISC 20C. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you can't clap from where you are, but just try if you can. With a warm applause, our first speaker, Aziza Chaouni, who's speaking on architecture, the search for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba. Thank you, Baba. Thank you, Michael, so much for inviting me. I wish we were all together. So just bear with me for screen sharing. Okay, let's see. Are you viewing?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so Baba and Michael, thank you again so much. Thank you for having me in this great panel. The theme I have to tell you was, like extremely complex to respond to in 15 minutes. So I've decided to take my own specific angle to answer it. And the question that I asked myself was, how does identity, justice, and continuity express itself in my own practice and in my own research? And the angle that I chose to take is to speak with you about one of the tools that for me designers can use to, in a way, bring social justice to their projects, or so in a way, or to establish it as a goal and reach it through this tool. So I'm going to start with a short introduction. So as you all know, Africa and other countries in the global south are experiencing the fastest urban growth in the world today, with the expansion of existing metropolises and the construction of new ones. Meanwhile, economic inequalities have been expanding, rendering social equality in urban spaces a hard goal to achieve for architects and then for urbanists. So in order to ensure that all the new African cities meet the current and future needs of their citizens while ensuring social justice, one key tool, like I just mentioned to you, that the design disciplines have is to involve citizens in the design process of urban spaces and also of architecture projects. If participatory design approaches and tools are widely prevalent in contemporary design practices, the direct transfer to African contexts without careful adaptation can be problematic on many regards. Indeed, unlike their counterparts in the global north, it can be argued that African cities usually share the following challenges: limited budgets, scarce infrastructure, vulnerability towards climate change, illiteracy of users, lack of participatory governance, citizens' engagement towards public spaces, and most importantly, what I found in my practice is their suspicion towards the benefits of their involvement in the production of the urban realm, which is perceived as a top-down process limited to experts. Such constraint, especially the latter, begs for the creation of adequate approaches that enable citizens in Africa to first trust such a process, then to believe in the importance of the knowledge they hold, which I call the genius loci, and finally, hand in hand, to engage hand in hand with architects and urban designers in crafting a collective vision for their cities. So this collective approach goes beyond the delineation of criteria and ideas for the design of an urban space. Its foremost role for me is to define, in the early stages of the design process, a common social project for this very urban space. Having worked on public projects across borders for the past 14 years, between Europe, North America, North Africa, the Middle East, all the way to Oceania, I've been lucky to be in a privileged position to learn from and critically assess architectural participation as practiced in the West or Global North, and in turn transfer its ethos in my projects in the Global South context, in which such approaches are seldom practiced and in which participatory governance and citizens' engagement are just starting. From my experience in Europe and North America, which have a long-standing tradition of architectural participation dating from the 1960s, I have learned a great deal about creative tools to integrate users in the design process, about the role of the designer as a mediator between the client's need and the user desires, but I won't hide from you that my engouement was tinted by some disenchantment. In fact, the involvement of the user was too often token, bringing a degree of worthiness and validity to the architectural process without really transforming it, like a little box that one checks. In the past decade, government policy in Europe and North America has made participation a necessary part of public work. It has thus been institutionalized and has become like another box among many others to tick in order to get permit or funding. On the African continent, international organizations such as the African Bank for Development, the MCF, or the World Bank have also made it a requirement at times. In both cases, participation becomes a de facto organized and often manipulated part of a given urban project, in which users are meant to be given a voice, but rather the process stifles the sound coming out. This paradox emerges because architectural participation revolves around the idealized notion of consensus building. In other words, by trying to reach consensus at any cost, many complexities, nuances, and differing voices are often bypassed, while options given to users cannot be challenged. Rather, like Jeremy Till has expressed in his seminal book, Architecture Depends, I see a benefit in accepting the contested conditions of the participatory process. Its limitation is unpredictability and uncertainties. This definition seems better suited to African contexts in which social, economic, and environmental conditions are often shifting, and a participatory process that allows for multiple paths can only lead to an urban environment that not only has a sense of ownership for all, but is also responsive and resilient to change. I prefer to coin it collective participation towards a common social project, rather than collaborative participation, which can imply the forceful or willing alignment of one's action with the aim of power, politics, or economics, or combination thereof. The historical allusions are clear, and here I just quoted Eli Wiseman in his foreword for Marcus Neeson's The Nightmare of Participation, a book I highly recommend. So, to illustrate my brief introduction, I wanted to share with you one of my projects in Morocco called, it's the Thermal Bath by Jean-François Zivako, and it's a project of rehabilitation. And for this specific project, we crafted design tools that I hope allowed the different stakeholders to participate in the process of reprogramming and rehabilitation of the thermal bath station. So I have a very short time, so excuse me if I go quick in this project, but I want to share with you all of the tools that we used in a sense to bring social justice to a process that in Morocco for this very large project is very top down. The thermal baths were built right after Morocco's independence and were among a wave of tourism projects that were developed in Morocco to spur its economy right after its independence, and that received a lot actually of World Bank funding. And you can see here some of the examples of these projects that are all very well illustrated on the ArcaNet platform, actually. And one of the first of such a project actually was the Sidi Harazem thermal bath. And the reason for that is that, and this is in the time of my grandparents, is that thermalism was one of the main source of, or I would say the main holiday destination in Morocco, so the main mean of leisure. And the reason why Sidi Harazem was the most popular place to vacation back in the 50s and actually all throughout the past centuries was because it allied the presence of a Sufi saint that you can see here, Sidi Harazem, and the presence of a hot spring and a very beautiful oasis. So my grandmother actually learned to swim in one of these pools here. So it had a hot spring. And the young Moroccan state in 1959 decided to launch a major infrastructure project with a hotel and thermal pools. And Sidi Harazem is located right outside of Fez, which is my hometown, where I'm calling you from. And the state pension fund was the entity that commissioned this project to Jean-François Zévaco, who's a Moroccan architect from Corsican origins, who was born and lived all of his life in Morocco. And the project was monumental in scale. It had 14 hectares, had this entrance plaza, a very large pool, a hotel, a central courtyard that he called the Riyadh, a plaza, and then 2 markets. But most importantly, water was interwoven across the entire complex. Unfortunately, as beach tourism became more popular in Morocco, less and less people were coming to this thermal spring, and many of its spaces that you can see here in red started to close down. And you can see here its very extensive water system that was simply using gravity also stopped being in use. You can see here some of the photos of the original project, the famous pool, the central courtyard, and this is the courtyard today, totally abandoned, and the bungalows. And as the 2 markets closed down, a set 2 informal markets started to emerge that had, problems with infrastructure, with bathrooms, and so forth. So actually, when I was a student at the GSD, as I was coming back to Fez, and I used to swim in the swimming pool that you can see right behind me, of all the time, especially in the winter when it was cold. I noticed its dilapidated state, that it was closing little by little. And actually, like as a Moroccan, I didn't know at all who was the architect, when was it built, even if it had any architectural significance. So speaking about, identity, one of the reasons, that's one of the topics of this panel, one of the reasons why I picked to show you this project is because this type of architecture, modern brutalist architecture, was not considered, or still not considered today in Morocco as part of our history. Whereas this Sidi Harazem was the largest public infrastructure project built by the Moroccan state after its independence. So it really symbolized how the young Moroccan independent state wanted to appear, modern, yet mixing some component of its traditions within the architecture. So speaking about activism, since the government did not think that this was a piece of heritage and didn't mind closing it down little by little, I applied to the Keeping It Modern program offered by the Getty Foundation, and that actually funded, so we were successful in 2017 to get the funding to develop a conservation management plan. And 2 of the goals of the conservation management plan was that I put forward was to raise awareness around the heritage values of the thermal complex, but also to design, like a vision for its future. And I wanted this vision to be co-designed with the actual users and stakeholder of the thermal bath. And so one of the first questions that I had to ask myself is, who are the constituents and the stakeholders? Where first of all, they're the inhabitants of the village nearby, the market stall owners, all of the workers and the peddlers, the tourists, the local youth and children, and the local authorities, and members of the state pension funds, who are still the owner. However, what I noticed is there was a group of the population that never had, let's say, a voice, were considered as a minority and were actually living, or I would say surviving, on the margins. And those were the market stall owners and the workers, and that you can see here. And it was, extremely important to establish a one-to-one friendly relationship with these stakeholders, since there was no trust of them, of anyone, let alone me. And this actually took some time, and this really was the luxury of having keeping it modern grand. And one of the biggest hurdle was really this one, is the biggest challenge was really the shifting perception that brutalist heritage was also part of Morocco's history and part of our own heritage. And that took a lot of tools that I'm going to share with you, but foremost really was this informal meetings to just chat and to just like explain what's our role as architects, who was Zevaco, and parts of the history of the space. And then we started, as we gained some trust, we developed a survey system where we first maps all of the workers in the thermal bath, the formal one and the informal ones. What are they selling, what's their salaries, etc. And since about 50% of them did not know how to read and write, we developed a survey sheet with only a pictogram, where we asked them what they see as the biggest problem in the space, what did they see as assets. And then we've also involved the local population in sharing with us some photos and documentation about the past of the thermal bath station, since we could not find plans all the time. And what was very successful was a campaign launched on Facebook, where we received some photos that were the ancestor of the selfie, that were actually quite incredible, and that they help us discover some part of the design that were actually altered. Like another tool that was very popular was the treasure hunt for children, of finding the columns of Zevaco. So we worked a lot with the one school that was close by. And also we trained local youth to become architecture tour guides. And in a sense, they became ambassador for the project. And we developed a board game where market stall owners were able to share with us ideas about the program. There are some programs that never thought were needed, like a small clinic, or like a police station there, like a small police station, because there was some insecurity at night. And actually, kind of the photo that you can see here may seem very maybe normal to you, but for me to get to this point, to be able to convince the Moroccan government that peddlers and market stall owners had some ideas and had some thought to share. I was always told that I am the expert. I'm paid by Getty to bring ideas. I should not be, subcontracting this job to people that don't have a degree. So this was a very big shift in mentality that had to occur. And we did a bunch of collages and exercises with children on how to transform some of the abandoned spaces. And that all culminated into like a master plan for the zoning, and then for the protection, and also for the phasing, as well as an exhibition in which that was in the capital city, and in which people that were also did not know about Sidi Harazem would discover its past, present, and future. And then we realized as well that social media were very powerful. And then we've invited young Moroccan artists that had actually never heard of Sidi Harazem to come and then to stay on site and to develop a project. This is Mohamed Kilito, who did a series of portraits of youth of Sidi Harazem that we hanged on the main plaza. And that gave also some visibility to the heritage values of Sidi Harazem. And then the first rehabilitation project of the first building with this marketplace started in February 2020. and was supposed to change it into, to move the exhibition about Sidi Harazem there and to have a cafe. Unfortunately, you all know what happened. Unfortunately, in March 2020, the state had no more funds whatsoever, which was really understandable for rehabilitation of heritage. And I was also, I decided to come to Morocco and to be quarantined and get stuck with my family here. So what did I have as a choice? All of this work and all of this efforts and research amounting to nothing. Was there something that one could do? In a sense, having built the trust and a relationship with the population through this process, like I felt that my role as an architect, as a citizen, and as an activist was to still do something. And one idea was to, and I got the green light from the Moroccan government and the state pension fund, was to invite a diversity of artists that had, some of them, no venues anymore for their art or no more exhibition or events, since this was in the middle of nowhere outside of Fez, to actually come to Sidi Harazem, to stay for free in the hotel and to develop, if they wanted to, a project, and to also meet with the local population. And this was actually, like a life changer, since these artists came back with their families, and then, some, activity restarted in Sidi Harazem. And then we got some additional funding from the French embassy to actually fund the project of artists. This is the dance company Ishtah that did a whole choreography on the side of Sidi Harazem. We also invited the youth from Sidi Harazem to come and dance hip hop. This is me trying to dance hip hop very poorly. And finally, I'm sorry if I went over time, but if you want to learn more about the Sidi Harazem Station rehabilitation project, we put all of our work online, and there is also like the master plan on which people can vote on things they like or they don't like. I invite you to visit it, sidiharazemstation.com. And finally, I just wanted to end by sharing with you that even if COVID and like in a way halted the project, kind of there are a few things that we were able to transfer. I mean, hopefully the Sidi Harazem project will continue. Right now, we are bringing in way culture into it to keep it active. But I've been for the past year working in Senegal, Dakar, on the international fair, also with the Getty Foundation. And we're transferring a lot of the methods that we developed in Sidi Harazem, and we're improving them about participatory design. And like Sidi Harazem, CSS is going actually very fast. We're going to be very soon, hopefully, starting the first rehabilitation. And a project very dear to my heart is the Old Forabe College, which is the oldest Western university, if I may call so, in West Africa, in Freetown, Sierra Leone, that we just started literally a week ago with the word of Monument Fund. So the idea is to have a collaborative rehabilitation process, a programming process, but also as the rehabilitation is happening. As we know, COVID happens on the African continent, many things are in flux. And I find that the activation through culture of those historical spaces that sometimes are not considered as heritage. The CSS, the fair in Dakar, because it's a brutalist complex, also is not considered as heritage, I found very nice tools. So thank you very much. Sorry if I went over time. Yeah, and for the International Fair of Dakar, we have a website already if you want to go and learn a bit more about the International Fair. Sunusi says Dakar Cargo.site. Thank you.